Tēnā tātou katoa. We seek wisdom, understanding, insights into the views and circumstances of others, strength to seek what we believe in, humility to accept the combined decisions of others, patience, good humour at all times, tolerance and courtesy, while working in the best interests of the community. Morning, councillors, and to guests at the back of the room. Welcome to the governing body for the 30th of July 2020. First of all, we have apologies. I have received none, so everybody is here or online. So don't need to move to accept apologies. Attendance by electronic link. Not Councillor Henderson anymore. He is very much here, alive and present.
Not quite, but I might have to leave if it keeps going past 2 o'clock, and then I'll rejoin on electronic link.
Okay, that's great. And I think I'll just double check. I've got Councillor Chris Fletcher online. Are you online, Councillor Fletcher? Yeah, I can't hear.
I'm online. Thank you.
That's great. I'll move that we approve the electronic attendance for Councillor Fletcher. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Dalton, all those in favour please say aye. To the contrary, carried. Declarations of interest. Are there any members of the governing body with an interest to do with today's agenda that they need to disclose? If not, we have confirmation of minutes, and we have two sets of minutes. The minutes for the governing body meeting of the 25th of June, both open and confidential, and the minutes of the 16th of July, the extraordinary governing body meeting. I'll move that we adopt those minutes, and seconded by Councillor Walker. Any discussion? If not, all those in favour please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. There are no petitions. There is no public input. There is no local government input, and I have not been advised of any items for extraordinary business. So we come to the really important part of today's agenda, which is the adoption of the emergency budget 2020-2021. So if I can have officers at the table for that, thank you very much. And also not only to welcome our council officers, but the Tupunamonga Authority, Paul Majuri, Dominic Wilson and Nick Turoa. Haere mai. And I will put the motion to adopt the emergency budget. I will move that. Councillor Simpson, can I ask you to second that, please? I was just about to put the motion, and then I realised, no, we need to discuss that first. It's a rather important item of the agenda. There are a number of different parts to our resolution today, and the first is to agree to the Tupunamonga Authority operational plan and the summary of the Tupunamonga Authority operational plan. I'm conscious that the chair of the authority, Paul Majuri, needs to get away, so I'm going to suggest that could we just in the first part of our question and discussions deal with the Tupunamonga Authority operational plan. So if I can open that up I think we can do questions and comments together. We've workshopped this yesterday and the emergency budget, and we've workshopped the emergency budget for 50 hours. So I'm not presuming that we'll want to have 21 speeches around it, either of those things today, but we do need to have the opportunity for questions and any comments. So just looking first of all at the adoption of the operational plan for the TMA, are there any councillors wanting to ask questions or to make comments? Councillor Filipaina.
Just comments, if that's okay, Your Worship.
That's fine, thank you, Councillor.
Look, I want to acknowledge our Tupunamonga Authority staff in regards to the operational plan, but also the actual committee itself. The reason I say that, Your Worship, is because one, when this was brought to the Tupunamonga Authority Committee, it was passed unanimously across the table with our elected members and with mana whenua. Your Worship, I think, and this is not going to be a long sort of comment, but I think two things that need to be put in front of everybody. One is the fact that the Tupunamonga Authority decided to take cuts themselves, independent of council. They decided that this is what we will be doing to put forward. I want to acknowledge them in regards to that. They also did an independent consultation process with our community, and I know that some councillors around this particular table asked questions around some of the changes that were there, and the answer was sent through to them. So, Your Worship, I just want to acknowledge our rangatira, Paul Majuri, our chair on that committee, who has, since I've been there as deputy chair, carried all our votes. And I mean, I remember before I got onto the Tupunamonga Authority is that decisions are made by consensus, which is, you know, something we as a governing body and other committees should take on board. So look, to our rangatira that are here, ngā mihi ki a koe, kia koutou katoa, and just to say thank you, Your Worship. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thank you very much, Councillor Filipaina. Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Your Worship. And notwithstanding the voluntary 5% cut that the TMA have volunteered, understanding the situation for the council at this time, I have a real difficulty in supporting this, because this is our only opportunity with the ratepayers' funds that go into the Tupunamonga Authority to register my concern that of the 176 submissions that were received, 139 did not support single stage tree felling. And while I support the long-term objectives, in an operational sense, I feel that the canopy that is provided, particularly on Owairaka, is providing a lot of support for in an environmental and ecological sense. And this is my only way of registering my concern in terms of the detail of that operational plan. So as we discussed yesterday, it's a sort of all or nothing thing. So I have to say at this point, I cannot support this, that the vast majority of submitters asked for changes. There's been, as far as I can determine, very little, indeed none, that I can identify change to the operational plan, and for that reason I will not be supporting this today.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. I take that as a comment rather than a question needing to be answered. Are there any other comments or questions from around the table on just on the Tupunamonga Authority? Yes, Councillor Walker.
Sure. I just want to support the comments that Councillor Fletcher made. I have a similar view. That is not to say that I'm not supportive of a phase change over time to native vegetation on the Munga, but in my view, the existing vegetation forms an important role, certainly in terms of retaining carbon, and that meets our climate change objectives, and it provides incredibly valuable habitat for both native wildlife and exotics. And I believe that succession planting over time, which is a generally accepted ecological principle, is far better than just blanket logging and replacement with very, very young natives that will have a very high death rate over the dry summers that we have. So I have a very real concern there, and I share the comments that Councillor Fletcher made. And this, again, is my only way also of registering that concern. And I have visited the Monga.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Worship. Just on this I just want councillors to be really sure that they have directly spoken to the Tupunamonga Authority about monga that may be in their backyard. I mean, I've heard Councillor Fletcher, but I asked a question yesterday and I followed it up in writing. There are no felling of exotics on Ahiniral, Mount Hobson this year. And to that end, that makes me happy to support the plan. I mean, I just make sure that you know exactly what's going on in the Monga that is in your backyard. That's what I'm thinking.
Thank you, Councillor. Before I put recommendation A, I just want to check that there are no further comments or questions. Councillor Hills.
No, just a brief comment. Definitely support it. I everyone has their right to have their say, obviously, but I am concerned that we have been through this a number of times. These maunga have, through treaty settlement, been given back to iwi. We have a say in that. We feed back into it, but as the Tree Council, as many iwi, as Ngāti Whātua, as others have come to us and said, we are tired of being told what to do on the small, tiny bits of land that iwi were given back or negotiated back over hundreds of years of stolen land. So I think, yep, we can all have our opinion, but my opinion is that it's would be a concerning space if we start withholding budget because we do not like what is legally allowed to be done through a process and through consultation and through feedback to restore and revegetate the maunga to native forests that iwi see as they always should have been.
Thank you, Councillor Hills. Any further comment? Councillor Coombe.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. E te rangatira, Paul, tēnā koe, kia ora koutou. I would just like to offer my acknowledgement of the work of the Tupunamonga Authority, and I have just been so impressed with everything that you're doing. I just absolutely love the tihi without vehicles polluting the air and just seeing how it's just really changed the whole environment. I really want to acknowledge your authority around implementing operational plans that you have put a lot of consideration into. And I feel that around this table, this isn't the time for us to be trying to unpick those plans because I know a huge amount of consideration has gone into them. And just to see the way in which there's a whole new approach to managing the maunga. In every interaction I've had and experience of visiting, it's just been positive. And to see the new signage, the new trails, to go to Faux Cafe, to see the exhibition there. I mean, it's just all a really, all Aucklanders are benefiting from your governance over our maunga. So I'd like to just add my thanks to that and feel that we should all around this table really get behind the operational plan and acknowledge this is our opportunity to acknowledge your authority and your governance. So I just wanted to add that to the discussion. Thank you, and of course it has my wholehearted support. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any further comments? Otherwise, I'll just make a short concluding comment myself. I grew up in an area called Three Kings, and the Three Kings represented the three volcanic cones that once existed in that area. One is left, and that one has got a reservoir on top of it, Puki Tā Papa, and the other area of my former electorate has a reservoir built into it. And over a century and a half, we did enormous damage to what really is part of the taonga of Tamaki Makaurau. And first of all, I want to acknowledge that the ownership of the maunga have been handed back to the 13 iwi. So they are now the owners, but the provision of the legislation is that they will hold ownership with on behalf of all iwi and all of the people of our city. I think some excellent things have happened with the maunga. We are incredibly blessed as a city that we have across our landscape these areas that have not been built on and that can be open space held for the benefit of all Aucklanders in perpetuity. So I want to thank the Maunga Authority for its stewardship of those mounts. There is controversy, of course, around whether the exotic trees should be cleared at once or in stages. There's a matter before the court in regard to Owairaka, and I don't want to get into that. But once that matter has been dealt with, there is room for further discussion, and I would encourage people to engage, and I would also stand out against those that are exploiting the difference of opinion, which in many cases is genuine, over the removal of trees, with an underlying element of prejudice against the iwi ownership of the maunga. And I regret some of the things that have happened at Owairaka, and if you read some of the Facebook postings and you see some of the slogans that have been daubed, there is no room, in my view, in Tamaki Makaurau for that sort of prejudice and outright abuse and irrationality. So let's deal with issues as they arise. There will always be issues that arise. There will be differences of opinion genuinely held, but we should have zero tolerance to some of the racism that has underlined some of the activity of those that are opposed to what the Tupunamonga Authority and the Trust is doing. I have had a division requested on this issue, so I'm going to ask Sandra to call for a vote by division on agreeing to the operational plan, which is recommendation A, as part of the adoption of our emergency budget. Sandra.
Councillors, you're voting on Clause A, as you see it on the screen. Mayor Goff.
Aye.
Councillor Bartley.
Absolutely support. Yes.
Councillor Casey.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Aye.
Councillor Collins.
For.
Councillor Coombe.
Aye.
Councillor Cooper.
Or
Councillor Dalton.
Aye.
Councillor Darby.
For.
Councillor Filipaina.
Aye.
Councillor Fletcher.
Against.
Councillor Henderson.
For.
Councillor Hills.
Aye, thank you.
Councillor Mulholland.
For.
Councillor Newman. Councillor Sayers. Councillor Simpson.
or
Councillor Stewart.
or
Councillor Walker.
Against for the reasons I indicated earlier.
Councillor Watson.
Yep.
Councillor Young. That's carried 19 votes to 2.
So that is, I declare that carried 19 votes to 2. And can I just thank the Tupunamonga Authority both for being here again today and for the work that you're doing. Right, councillors, we now come to the other resolutions that are before us in terms of adopting the emergency budget. We have debated this issue now over a period of 7 months. And with the emergency budget that we have in front of us, we've put 50 hours into our workshopping of the issues. So I don't anticipate that everybody will want to discuss at length the issues that we have already agreed upon by majority vote and discussed. But there nevertheless is the opportunity for members to raise questions and to make comments. So I think I'll run those two sections together because I don't anticipate this it will necessarily be prolonged. I may be wrong. So any councillor wishing to speak to recommendations B on adopting the budget and C, which is simply the normal delegation of authority for minor editorial changes. Okay, the floor is open. Councillor Walker.
So I'm just making the assumption that this is both questions and speaking, that's
Yes,
correct?
that's correct, Councillor.
Okay, so the particular concern that I've indicated earlier is that our budget also includes effectively the budget of water care. Auckland is experiencing a drought and issues around water. I regard that as a wonderful opportunity, if this council was mindful, to actually make considerable savings that go to carbon emissions. And I say that because the carbon that is inherent in water is huge. On the part of water care, it amounts to 670,000 gigajoules of energy per year, so this is immense. It also includes a significant amount of latent energy over and above that. So if there is a single thing that this council wants to do something about emissions, one of the things that we can do is encourage Aucklanders to conserve. On my part, I've put up a whole range of options to water care, quite specifically around how they could do that. Some of those things go to the earlier experience of the water crisis back in 93, 94. I remain very concerned that this council still has, after the notice of motion that myself and Councillor Watson put on the, I think the 5th or 6th of June, for urgent action around this issue, that we have still had no report back to a committee of council, or for that matter the governing body, around what council is actually doing around this issue. No reporting to us around the savings that Auckland Council is making as the biggest single user of water in the region as a business. Quite obviously, we've had some workshops. Consequently, I do not think that the budget provision that Watercare have of the order of 50 million is sufficient to cover the drop in revenue that would be expected in the short term to actually enact a full-on campaign to save water and to sustain that into the future for the reasons of saving carbon. So I have a real concern around that. I want to put that on the table. And the other concern that I have is that I believe that the other budgets, those for regional facilities and Panuku, contain items that I would suggest are imprudent for us to fund, especially around some of the funding on RFA's part that goes to stadiums, against a background where we know our international visitor numbers are dropping significantly, and also as it goes to Panuku, investments in areas against a background where there is, I would suggest, a depressed market that goes to apartments and also commercial building. And I've registered those issues before. So for that reason, I have a concern around the emergency budget.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Coombe.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had a point of clarification. You'll be pleased to know I don't intend to embark on another speech or round of thank yous, but in terms of, I just want to know if this is me not being able to find the documents, but on the agenda it says that the documents would be circulated before the meeting, and I can't find them on Nexus or on Info Council, the actual emergency budget documents. So just wanted to know when they're going to be uploaded and available.
Okay, I'm just advised that they're on Nexus under workshop from yesterday because of the same documents, and they're also emailed. So
Yeah, I've got that. I'm just asking for, from a public-facing perspective, how do we share what we're resolving on right now?
I understand, I'm being informed that they will be uploaded for public consumption. These are now public documents. But thank you for raising that issue. Right, we have Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Your Worship. I want to recognise that this is an extremely difficult time for New Zealand, and it's an extremely difficult time for the Auckland Council. But I have and want to express again today the concern that I've got in the way in which we have been at times wanting to blame Watercare for where the council situation is at. Watercare is self-funding and is fully funded in their 10-year funding plan, including allowances for events like the current drought. The Watercare balance sheet, as we know, has sufficient capacity to take on more debt, and that customers should not need necessarily to pay more by way of rates. I don't want to talk about the rates issue because I think that's for a subsequent item. But what I do want to say is that I think there is public confusion about the role of water care. And while on page 81 of the documents that we looked at yesterday, this discussion about water care's drought-related debt mitigation, I think the public have a right to know that this in itself is not a justification on the rating issue. And I think that's been further compounded with the letter. Thank you for sending it through, Your Worship, this morning. In your letter, you talk about after we went up for consultation on the budget, we secured further water supplies, etc. But they require a further 239 million, which we have had to add into our budget. I think that that is somewhat confusing and misleading for the public. But again, I recognise all the work that's done. I recognise that today is not a time for long speeches, but I do want to register my concern that water care has been painted as the bogey in this one. And I think that there were other things that we could have done in recognising the extent of the problems without attacking, it seemed to me, what is one of our best performing CCOs, notwithstanding the issue about remuneration, but in terms of water care's own governance and ongoing operational issues. So I welcome the work that you're doing with central government to help us on that debt mitigation issue, but I do feel that we have been somewhat unfair in the way that these issues have been presented to the public.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Casey.
There's not a lot of joy in the budget, as we've all recognised over recent weeks and months, but there's 3 small things we did on budget day that I want to refer to right now. And the feedback I've received since budget day has been positive on those 3 things. And the first is restoring the hours to the libraries. I think everybody in Auckland thinks that's a wonderful thing to have done. It's great. The other thing is giving back the LDI to local boards. Again, that's where the rubber hits the road. The most contact with the people of Auckland are through the local boards and local projects. But the final thing, and it was a promise that you made, Mr. Mayor, was to pay our cleaners a living wage. And they're here today to congratulate us all. And some of the cleaners are here. The cleaners who actually clean our toilets in the town hall will now be paid fairly. And I thank you for that. And I thank all the people in this room, and I'd like to see it carried through this budget unanimously today, because it's a great thing to do.
Thank you, Councillor Casey, and can I acknowledge those from the Living Wage Movement at the back of the room. And I think as a group collectively, we're proud of the fact that notwithstanding the huge challenges in front of us in this budget, we have retained the commitment that we have made that in this term of this council, our cleaners, contracted staff, but nevertheless working in council, will get the living wage in full. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your presentations to us over various times, and thank you for your commitment to that cause. Councillor Hills.
Thank you, Mayor Goff, and maybe it was a debating point, but could we have a clarification on the water care issue? Because it was mentioned that it was self-funding and it didn't need to come out of our budget, but that is because it's a debt-funded issue, we have to provide the debt room to fund that 239 million. Watercare are finding 120, but we are having to find the other half of the funding. So could we just, I know they're self-funding, but because it's capital, it's our budget that has to be affected to help them fit into the debt room this year. Can I have an answer on that? Because that was a bit confusing.
So I could I can make a very brief comment, but the officials might like to add to it. The fact is that the debt that Watercare.
Could I just have that maybe the better of the staff to answer?
Yeah. I just want to make one point on it. The debt that Watercare borrows comes on our books and affects our debt to revenue ratio, and every councillor around this table understands that we've been struggling to keep that rise in debt to revenue ratio because of COVID-19 below 290%. So that added a bit of a shock to our budget and ensured that we needed to raise more revenue to enable us to keep at no higher than 290% for the following year. But Michael, do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, just through the chair, the comment is correct that Watercare is self-funding over the long term. The question is whether Watercare had balance sheet capacity, and in Auckland Council we have a group balance sheet, so there's no question of whether an individual CCO or the parent has their own balance sheet capacity. The capacity is always a group question, and that's where the challenge has been at a group level.
Thank you, Councillor. Anything? I reserve the right to reply at the end, but Councillor Greg Sayers, if you do wish to speak, can you please indicate to me reasonably soon, because we've got no other speakers on the list other than I think Councillor Hills. Have you wanting to? No. Okay. Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Worship. Just a couple of constructive comments. The first one, the document in terms of revenue line. The document we went out to, there was a deficit there of about 600 million compared down to 350 odd million now, so that's terrific. And I'm just hoping that during the term, Your Worship, we have a chance to revisit that, and hopefully with positive news. We've taken our best assumptions around that, and whether we've got a V coming out or something else might go wrong that's unexpected as well. So I just want to acknowledge that, and also the fact that we will have a chance to keep reviewing that throughout this emergency year. And on the expenditure side, just I think who's accountable at the end of the day? It's probably us sitting around this table. So we just need to remain vigilant around ensuring that those budgets that we set are met. And that's really talking to the acting chief executive there as well on behalf of the parent, and certainly to Mr. Stabback when he comes in around the parent, just trying to stick to those figures, because we haven't got the best reputation as organisation. We can set the budgets, but we're not always meeting them. And even just our employee benefits is a controllable one, still 8 million, above where we thought we would be this quickly into the LTP, even though I acknowledge that's down from 21. Right. It's just a vigilance around that, Your Worship, that I want to highlight today, and happy to support the recommendation as well.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just very quickly, it would be remiss of me not to acknowledge Living Wage Aotearoa who are here. Just as the chair of the Living Wage Advisory Group, which is a humble honour to be involved with. Once we pass this, this will go to that group where Living Wage Aotearoa and staff will work towards implementation, and I'm very proud of that. And I just wanted to acknowledge you guys for your attendance, and thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask Councillor Simpson to take the second to last call as the chair of the Finance and Performance Committee, but I don't want to omit anybody else that wants to ask a question or speak. I've got no other interest indicated there. Councillor Hills?
Yeah, I'll just talk briefly. It's, I guess for me, this obviously for all of us was and is probably the worst and hardest plan and decision-making process we've probably ever been through. I guess when we still, there's still a lot of confusion out there that we haven't made the hard decisions. I'd say $120 million worth of savings is a pretty hard decision. I'd say our local areas that will notice the cuts is a hard decision. I'd say hundreds of millions of dollars worth of delayed capital is a hard decision. I'd say 600 staff who already do not have work with us anymore is a hard decision. I'd say potentially up to or over 500 of our current staff that may lose their jobs and will likely lose their jobs through the budget process. I'd say that was a hard decision. I'd say the negotiations right now on freezing pay for a year, working with the unions and others, that is going to be a hard decision. There are a lot of things we will not and cannot do because of the significant reduction in our revenue due to the pandemic. There is going to be up to $200 million worth of sales of assets. I know many of us don't want to do that, but we do not have much of a choice in this situation unless we want to put up rates another 11% to cover that $200 million shortfall. So there's lots of things that are difficult, but I will say it is fantastic that we are, there will be no effects to libraries, that our local boards were clear and around keeping their discretionary budgets at 100%, and the councillors who worked hard to get that over the line is fantastic. And the fact we increased the transport, the community safety budgets, the fact that there won't be the cuts to public transport that originally were proposed, the fact we're still building almost $2.5 billion worth of capital and keeping those jobs going and working with the government on shovel ready is quite amazing compared to what maybe we thought 3 months ago. The fact that we are able to pay a living wage and work towards paying our cleaners a living wage and that keep that process going is pretty amazing. The fact we're keeping in some of the climate change policies is pretty amazing, because there is no delay to climate change. So I guess there's a lot of people out there still saying we didn't make any hard decisions. It is extremely difficult what we are leaving the management and CEO and everyone to deal with after we pass this budget. But I think there's heaps of very good things in there we've managed to say, but it is extremely difficult. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Collins.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. My comments will be short. I just wanted to acknowledge the living wage folk as well. I was on the phone with one of them last night and forgot that fellow would be here. But it's so good to see the living wage movement folk here. And I just wanted to reflect on, over the last week or so, I've had a number of people come up to me when I'm at the library or the pools in Otahu, and they've been really direct about how they feel about the emergency budget, and especially because I live in Otahu, and that's had the effect of not getting, or the deferment of the development area. But I think people have really reflected on how difficult a decision it has been for people around this table. So it's good because, you know, the pool is such that it's not over my head, so no one can try and drown me for the decision that I made. But I think people acknowledge that 3.5%, especially in our area, was a tough call, and they've congratulated Councillor Filipaina as well, who hasn't come walking with me in the pool, but that's all right. I always get lapped by people who are well older than me too. But on that, Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to reflect on something slightly different. In that last week, I joined Desley Simpson. I was going to call her Councillor Desley Simpson, but she was wearing a different hat and had come in her capacity as chair of a charitable trust to make a truckload donation to a group to Māngere Budgeting Services. And we, in that, I hope it's all right me mentioning this, but we met some people who were helping to put the food parcels together who'd been laid off from Air New Zealand. And it was freezing that day, but there was a joy and a happiness about them because they were contributing, and they were wearing the hardship of having lost their jobs during the COVID period, but were volunteering for another community group to help out. And I think that sums up a lot of our community. They acknowledge that it's tough going, but everyone's really throwing themselves together and supporting where possible. So I was grateful for the donation of the trust. I know that Daryl was really grateful too. And I'm grateful that there are people whom I know here from the Living Wage as well, who support so many of the people in my area in Monaco who are trying really hard to make ends meet. So to the councillors around this table, to the staff, thank you for everyone's desire to do the best for Auckland. It is tough, and we've seen it firsthand, but I know that we're going to get through this if we just, you know, we'll let people talk to us. I'll let people bite my ear off at the pool while I'm walking with them and I can't hide from them. But I think it's important that people feel like they can have a say too. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor, and for your acknowledgement of the good work that's being done out in the community there as well. Okay, if there are no other calls, I'll ask Desley Simpson as the Chair of the Finance Committee to make the penultimate call, and then I'll make some brief comments to conclude.
Oh, thank you, Worship, and I'm not going to give a big long speech, but I think sort of following on from Councillor Casey, I wanted to highlight some of the positives in a negative, really. I mean, it is an emergency budget, and I suppose I just want to, having, you know, had a bit of time out in the community, talking to people, I just did want to highlight a couple of things. This year, we will be delivering 12 times the original savings budget. Now, that's huge. That's the biggest savings budget we have ever delivered in this council. And just to put it into context, that's 80 million more than Dunedin City Council's capital expenditure program, or 30 million more than Tauranga's. It's a lot of money. Or more than three times the direct costs for funding all of our 55 libraries. It's a lot of money. And Patricia, you and your team, it's going to be a big challenge. The other thing is debt. I think we have struck a really good place with debt. Debt made me very nervous throughout the workshops, but I'm in a good place with it, and I feel good as a grandmother that we're not loading generations behind me on that debt, because we have left it in a good place. The sale of non-strategic assets, Richard's right, it's going to be challenging. But we do need to do that. But more importantly, with the assets that we have, we can look to the private sector to get more income from the assets we own, like car parking, and give us another income stream from them. That's all part of the asset recycling program. It's not just selling stuff. Staff cuts, look, that's tough, isn't it? It is tough. It's tough to let anyone go. But we have reduced staff budget. The staff budget that we're responsible for, that Patricia and that we are actually responsible for, has gone down 23 million. 23 million reduction in staff costs in the parent. So when people talk about staff, that's what we've gone down here. I think, ratepayers are still struggling to understand some of our decisions, so I want to highlight two things that have gone up. And I suppose the question I had asked yesterday, I'll ask and answer as part of my comment today. And that is, everything in this budget that has gone up will have a note as to why. All right? Because sadly, having cut all sorts of things, there are a couple of areas that have gone up. And I want to deal with them because, 101, politics is to front foot things that don't always look right, but there is obviously a tangible reason for it. And one is the increase in our total and direct operational expenditure. That's gone up. And people say, how come you're putting up rates, you're doing less, but it's costing more? Well, that's actually not right. I think it's important to separate pre-COVID and now. Look, our city has grown the size of Hamilton in the last 7 years. So of course we have to provide more services for more people, and that costs more. But we've got an ambitious capital program, and of course to do that, it costs more too. So I'm just sort of fronting it, that those costs have gone up. And water care, and I know, look, Councillor, it's not the bogey, but they are part of our group issue. They've acquired new technology subsidiary, and they've ramped up to supply services to the Waikato. They're going outside of just of Auckland, and that costs money. That's an increase in expenditure as well. So it's obviously offset by funding streams, but on a budget book, it shows as an increase. So at the end of the day, though, we still had $200 million less. Sorry, even though we found $200 million of savings, we've still had a huge cut in our income. And it won't balance as well as we would like it to balance any other year. I want to go back to staff again. So I've talked about the cut in our parent, but actually from the group, pre-COVID, those staff costs were going to go up 74 million, and post-COVID, they are going down 75. All right, so that's in the group. But look, it does challenge us, doesn't it? A crisis. And what I'm really proud of is the way, Patricia, you and the team have handled efficiency. You are basically restructuring our organisation to be smaller and more efficient, to be leaner and better. And that's a positive thing. We need to address that positively. And, maybe if we didn't have COVID, we could have maybe not been as efficient. So I think that's really good as well. But I think there's one big thing that we haven't done very well, and that's telling our story. Look, I don't think local government tells its story very good anyway, but I think that the thing that we've failed to do is explain to Aucklanders why zero was never going to work in the first place. And then when you had the two options, we didn't explain all the good stuff we were doing to get to a place where this budget has landed. So I think we absolutely need to do better with that. He waka akanoa shouldn't just apply now, nor should Team Auckland.
Yeah.
We should keep doing better and take it further. But I think we've landed in the best place we could, considering. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Simpson, and thank you for the other members that have also contributed, and thank you very much for those that restrained themselves from contributing, because you have done so in the past. I do want to acknowledge Councillor Simpson for chairing those endless workshops. Endless not meaning meaningless. They were inclusive. They were collaborative, and we reached our decision making in a collective way, including with the local boards. And the local boards, all 21 of them, have supported our 3.5% rate increase. That is, according to the local board chairs, the first time ever that there has been unanimity in the local boards, because they understood that with the loss of $450 million out of our budget because of COVID-19, largely through non-rates revenue, to lose another, what would have been another 86 million in capital and in OPEX, would have cut deeply into the services that were important to those local communities. I do want to touch just briefly on water, because Councillors Walker and Fletcher raised it. Demand management is going to be important, Councillor Walker, and we had a workshop yesterday and we explored a range of different things that we have to do. But before we beat ourselves up too much, if I recall my figures correctly, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, the litres per person per day in Auckland consumed is 157. Now, the figure I have in mind was 260 average across the country. I think that was right. Does that mean to say that we're doing better than the rest of the country? Yes. Does that mean that we can't do any better? The answer is no. We will continue to manage our water in a more effective way, and that requires some demand management techniques beyond just the restrictions that we put on in time of drought. In terms of Councillor Fletcher and water care, there was a study done of all the water supplier organisations across New Zealand by the Scottish Water Commission, and they found by a country mile, Auckland had the best services provided to any city or region of this country by a long way. By 60%, was it ahead of Wellington, which was second best.
Yeah.
And so I want to acknowledge that in water care. But in the same way, have water care done everything well, and have they and we planned strategically enough? And the answer is no. We are now in a situation maybe of a 1 in 200 year drought, but because of climate change, maybe a 1 in 10 year drought, in which case we have to make some big changes. And we are now working collectively, and water care, I think, has taken a much more open position than in the past to embrace council's involvement from Healthy Waters and through our new person appointed to deal with strategy for water. And we will find a way through this. But did that 224 million in capital and 16 million and 15 million in OPEX hammer our budget? The answer is yes, because we were working really hard on that debt to revenue ratio, and suddenly we had another spending of nearly $250 million in capex, and that caused us to re-examine what we needed to do in the rest of our budget. You cannot ignore the fact that we are bringing forward that expenditure into this year as having had a dramatic impact on top of COVID-19. Now, there are two things that, one thing I want to comment on was also Councillor Hill's. He's quite right. For those on the outside that say you haven't taken any pain, you haven't made any cuts, that is patently inaccurate. It's wrong. In fact, it's dishonest. We will lose around 1,000 staff members, 1 in 6. The first tranche of over 600 being temp and contract workers, the others being permanent full-time positions. And that really does hurt. There is nobody around this table that feels easy about the fact that good people have and will be losing their jobs. But clearly, With the loss of nearly $500 million in income, we need to be a leaner and a more adaptable organisation to do more with less, and that's what we're doing. And Councillor Simpson, you were quite correct in pointing out the savings that we're making this year are way above any other year. And that means that we will be trimming some of our services. It means that on the edge, and only on the edge, we will be reducing our capital investment. But what I believe, well, Councillor Casey is quite right, there isn't joy in making those cuts. There isn't joy. But what we can be proud of is what we have retained, what we have sustained, and we have kept those vital services. 250,000 each week use our libraries, 250,000 Aucklanders, and we have fully sustained our investment in that service and in a range of other services. When we look at the capital investment, is there a better time to invest in capital works than at the start of a recession where people are losing their jobs everywhere and where we deeply need to keep our construction industry going so that when we're ready with having emerged from the COVID-19 recession, that industry is in good shape to keep that work going. This time last year, we're saying the area was so overwhelmed with work, our costs were going up too quickly, and we couldn't get the skilled workers, we couldn't get the material to do some of these capital projects. And yet we all know there's a backlog of capital investment and construction work around the city that's been there for a decade, that's led to traffic congestion, that's led to environmental damage, that's led to housing shortage and unaffordability. I think we can be really proud that the budget that was going to be $2.7 billion for capital investment pre-COVID is now $2.57 billion. Slightly down, but way up on the $1.6 billion that we invested on average in each of the last 5 years. And I do commend to the public, and councillors will be familiar with this, but in our emergency budget document, just have a look at some of the stuff on transport. You know, Councillors Stewart and Young, 145 million going into the Eastern Busway and planning for the Botany and Monaco connections. We look at what's happening in the city centre, $54 million going in there in areas, urban cycleways, you know, another 49 million in that area. Active transport is really important. The safety-related projects, nearly $64 million, saving lives and stopping serious injury. $43 million on the electric trains. You look under water supply, and equally you see, you know, the Central Interceptor, which will transform stop the waste going onto our beautiful beaches, particularly in the Western Isthmus area. 197 million going in there. Wastewater, another 377 million in that area. Stormwater, 90 million. You look at parks and community, $50 million worth of new acquisitions. So are we doing things as a council despite the challenge of losing $500 million in income? And the answer is yes. And I think we can be proud of what we have sustained and what we've kept going, because we are using investment in capital works to generate economic recovery and to create new jobs at a time we desperately need it. So here we are at the end of COVID, not at the end of COVID-19, partway through COVID-19, fearful that what has happened in Melbourne, what has happened in countries around the world, that, you know, Hong Kong at the moment, Israel at the moment, that once had a proud record like New Zealand's, we have maintained that record. And we know there's been an economic cost, and we know that the next budget and the long-term plan and the 10-year budget will be about economic recovery. But we're starting it in this budget because we are investing that $2.57 billion in things that this city needs, that will be enduring legacies for this city and that will create jobs. So I commend this budget to the council. I think we've worked long and hard. I want to thank everybody for their professionalism, for their collective input, for their collaborative relationships in reaching the point that we have here. But we can go out from this budget with our heads held high, saying we've never faced a tougher challenge, but we faced up to it and we did the right thing. So a big thank you from me to our staff, but also to our local boards and to everybody around this table for your contributions. I'm going to put the recommendations now. I have had a councillor that wishes her vote to be noted against Resolution B. That's Councillor Fletcher, but I haven't had a call for a division. If there's no division called for, I will do it on the voices. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. I declare that carried without dissent, other than the noting by Councillor Fletcher of her concern about Resolution B. Thank you very much for that. Can I just call a 2-minute break while I have a quick chat to people at the back of the room who want to have a brief comment with me. So we'll resume in 2 minutes, which gives you time for a coffee. Thank you very much. Councillors, if we can resume now, thank you very much. And I'm going to ask Andrew and his team to come to the table. Our item number 10 on the agenda is the rate setting. Now that we have approved the annual budget formally, we need to strike our rates, and because this is a month delayed because of COVID-19, that must be done today. But Andrew, have you got any comments that you'd like to make just before we ask for questions or comments? Speaker, Andrew.
I'd like to introduce Eric Wen from our team, who does the rates modelling for us. Now, this is just the formal process to strike the rates based on the budget that you've just agreed to.
Thank you very much. Look, I'll move the recommendations. Councillor Simpson will second it. Thank you. And we have been through this process several times over, but if there's anybody, we will have a chance for questions and comments together. If there are any questions or comments, Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Your Worship. I want to acknowledge that there is a lot of good in this budget. And as I've said to many people, the only good thing to come out of COVID is the self-discipline that we've had to impose upon ourselves, that some of us have wanted to see on previous councils. So speaking at a personal level, I really welcome the Lena Council, and I really acknowledge the work that Patricia Reid has undertaken on our behalf. I welcome the divestment of non-strategic assets and recycling, if you will, and the willingness to really look to leverage off our balance sheet as best we can. And I really, really welcome the continuation of the investment in infrastructure for all the good reasons that you've said. So I think that the outstanding issue for me is the one of the value judgment over where we set the rates. Now, I was very angry that we did not go out with an option of a zero rates increase, because I think it would have helped the public better understand the predicament that council is in. And I think it was wrong to interpret those who came back with an option that wasn't 2.5% or 3.5% as a don't know. You know, that I think has just infuriated people. I think if we'd put that information out there, information is power, and it would have you would have had a very different response from a lot of people. But the concern that I've got is we are going through difficult times, and capital valuation is such a blunt way to establish rating revenue, particularly at times like this, because it isn't a sophisticated way of measuring household income. And that is what is changing for so many Aucklanders. So that is why I have been really keen to see the 2.5 being adopted rather than the 3.5%. It's been great to hear the contribution from Councillor Collins and Councillor Simpson. I'm pleased that they went out and saw Daryl Evans. He's one of the really inspired Aucklanders. I got to know him first when he was the electorate agent for Sandra Lee, and he's gone on and done a fantastic job at the Monaco Budgeting Services. But all of these places will tell you that the predicament and the concerns that people are feeling on whether or not they're going to have the income streams to be able to keep going in this COVID world that we're living in. So I don't want to labour these points here, Your Worship, but what I will say is that I think that we were at a point, and it comes back to debt, how we could have used that, recognising where the pain is. There's going to be pain irrespective of what decisions we take today, but I would like us to have some empathy for those Aucklanders whose income levels have changed dramatically and don't necessarily want to move their house. Now, Councillor Simpson will immediately jump in and say, well, we've got some rating relief programs that are new and different, but I don't know that will fully satisfy the concerns that are being expressed to me. So on that note, while I recognise a lot of the good things that have come about with this budget and all of the hard work and the work of staff, I would still have preferred that we've gone out with our consultation in a far more genuine way, and I, for one, would prefer to see a 2.5% rate increase rather than 3.5%, and I will register my vote accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other councillors wishing to make a comment? Councillor Simpson, do you want to say anything as chair of the Finance Committee?
Not really. Let's ask a couple of questions to Kevin. Kevin, was the consultation document passed to go out unanimous?
Yes, the vote was unanimous.
Thank you. And did anyone put up a resolution to go up for zero?
No, it was agreed to go out on the form it went out on.
And then I have a question for Andrew. Andrew, could you tell me what you know? This is a very difficult time. I acknowledge it's a very difficult time. Councillor Fletcher makes that point. Andrew, could you please tell me what we know about other councils in New Zealand and the rates they are setting, noting everyone in New Zealand has a high, has a community that they represent that is challenged by COVID-19. Thank you.
Christchurch, 3.5%. Dunedin, 4.1%. Tauranga, 4.7%. Hamilton, 4.7%. Wellington, 5.1% are the figures that I have here.
Thank you. I'll reserve my right potentially to speak later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Newman. This is comments and questions together, so please feel free to take your call now.
I mean, there's a degree of conjecture and everybody's got their view of history in relation to this. My view of history in relation to the discussion that took place during the COVID-19 lockdown is that there was a discussion around a proposed amendment, an amendment that was proposed by Councillor Dalton and seconded by myself, to expand the consultation to include a zero rate increase option for discussion with the community, and that amendment was withdrawn when the mover and seconder discovered that there just wasn't going to be a wide degree of support around the table for us to be able to have a vote and to go and to consult with the community on that option. My personal view is that I wouldn't have been afraid to put up a zero rate increase option and to really spell out to the people of Auckland that the cost of a zero rate increase, which is actually a cut in real terms, a significant cut in real terms, would have meant a very significant cut to services. It wasn't an option for consultation because the amendment was withdrawn. And that is the history as I understand it. But, Your Worship, I'm happy to support the recommended resolutions here and say that I have to tell you that I've never been actually I'm an opponent of setting a high uniform annual general charge, because I've always felt that actually the rates should land where they fall on the rateable capital value of the property. But I've always thought that the UAGC has been largely set in a way to try and achieve the greatest level of support from around the table. Is the UAGC too high for me? Actually it is. And I suspect it's too high for Councillor Filipaina and Councillor Collins and Councillor Henderson. It's too high for me, but probably for different reasons, but you know, it is too high. But it is set at a level that I think achieves a broad degree of support, and I'm prepared to accept that. But perhaps in the future, we should be more willing to take on the task of the zero rate option or options close to it, and really spell out the cost of that, and to confront those who support that option with the task of explaining how that will be afforded. I don't think we've done that to the extent that we could have. Perhaps we can do it next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Walker.
To one part of this, where I've been consistent, and that is part 7 around the accommodation targeted rate. I think councillors know that in principle that rate is unfair, grossly unfair, because it charges the accommodation sector for costs associated with tourism, of which that sector is only 9% of the various areas of the tourism economy that benefit. So that sector is being unfairly charged. And secondly, we know that the level of inbound tourism into New Zealand is virtually zero, and frankly we should dispense with this rate and not even persist with it going forward, because that circumstance is likely to continue for some time into the future. So I have a particular concern around part 7. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers before I speak and reply? Okay. I'm sorry, Councillor Cooper.
I'm going to speak, Mr Chairman, because there's been a lot of talk and I think we just about talked ourselves out and we've got to a good space. Just an interesting to note, we talked about other rate increases in other areas. I flew back from Wellington this morning and talking to somebody in the lobby waiting for my taxi. He lives on the Kapiti coast. His house is worth $1.1 million and he pays $8,000 annually in tax, in rates. And so, you know, yes, it's hard for some people paying their rates, and I think we've got a fantastic, we've put $50 million aside to help those people, and I think that's the right thing to do. But I think a bit of perspective for us in Auckland, we get a lot. We provide a lot of services. There's a lot of free things that we give to our people and provide for our people, really good quality services and buildings. And yet, you know, my house is worth quite a bit more than that, and I pay $4,000. And that person in Kapiti pays $8,000. So I feel really grateful for what I get for my rates, and I know that's probably, people are going to poo-poo that, but I'm really glad I live in Auckland and I don't have to pay that level of rates.
Thank you, Councillor. Then finally, if there's nobody else, Councillor Simpson.
No, Your Worship, actually I won't. I think I've done my bit today. I'll just let it go. Yuki, your turn.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, look, nobody doubts that COVID-19 is having an impact right across our city. Some it's impacting severely on, some not at all, and many it will impact in terms of lower income. And there are a number of people, including myself, I've got to say, around the table, that genuinely wanted to look at the alternative option of 2.5. The reason that we never went for zero, was because we understood that it was unsustainable, that it couldn't be done without absolutely savaging the services we provide and Aucklanders rely on, and hugely damaging our ability to invest in the future and to help economic recovery. As it is, on top of the 600 temps and contract workers we have had to let go, we will be losing 500 positions. Our then Chief Executive told us that a zero rate would almost double the number of people that we would lose from the council. So we talk about hurt. Those would be the people that are really hurting, but not just the people who lost the jobs, but the people who were no longer getting the quality of services that they could have expected from us because we didn't have the people to carry it out. I looked at what the difference was between 2.5 and 3.5, and for the person on the average rate level for $1 million home, it was 47 cents a week. 47 cents a week, and the total impact, I think, of the 3.5%, Councillor, was $1.82 extra a week. Is that correct? I think it is. Looking at my finance people, and they're not disagreeing. And I'm not making light of that. Nobody ever welcomes having to pay more for anything. I don't, you don't, and our constituents don't. But for a relatively small weekly sum, that would have resulted in $86 million less expenditure by this council at the time we were going into recession. And each and every councillor around this table have said, we'd like more, we'd like this for our people in my ward, we'd like something else. But if we slash our ability to raise the revenue, how do we pay for the key services that we have to deliver? And the answer is that we couldn't. There was a Herald headline, wasn't there? Shock rates rise. But we've just heard from our officers that our rates rise is in fact generally lower than every other growth or metropolitan city in this country, after a decade of having probably the lowest rate increases of any city in this country. I talked to a couple of people. Jenny Shipley was one of them, and Paula Bennett was another. And Jenny and Burton said, God, when we moved up from Ashburton, we didn't realise how low the rates were in Auckland for what you get for them. Paula Bennett mentioned it because her mum had moved up from Ohope. She said, feel free to use this, and pay tribute to Paula in a great speech she gave in Parliament as a valedictory yesterday. She said her mum just was blown away by the fact that she was paying less than what she was paying in a town like Ohope. So are we shock horror gouging? And the answer is no. Are we making every effort we can to make savings and to achieve greater value for money? The answer is yes, and that's what we need to do. So I think we've reached the right decision with the rates that we are planning to strike today. We have the continued obligation on us to try to do more for less, and the obligation to find value for money. We won't relent on our efforts in that part. But will we make a decision freely to slash services in the way that will hurt the people that we serve, to slash expenditure on infrastructure that we've been waiting decades to put in place? And the answer to that is no, we won't do that. That would be irresponsible on our part, and that's not what these measures propose. So I commend these recommendations to the governing body, and has there been a request for, no request for having...
A division, please.
Okay, there has been a request for a division, so I'll ask Sandra to take a vote on division.
Mayor Goff.
Aye.
Councillor Bartley.
For.
Councillor Casey.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Aye.
Councillor Collins.
For.
Councillor Coombe.
Aye.
Councillor Cooper.
Or.
Councillor Dalton.
Aye.
Councillor Darby.
For.
Councillor Filipina.
Aye.
Councillor Fletcher.
No.
Councillor Henderson.
Or.
Councillor Hills.
Aye, thank you.
Councillor Mulholland.
For.
Councillor Newman. Councillor Sayers.
No.
Councillor Simpson.
For.
Councillor Stewart.
For.
Councillor Walker.
Yes, but if I can have my vote against A7.
Councillor Watson.
No.
Councillor Young.
For.
18. It's carried 18 votes to 3.
So I declare that carried 18 votes to 3. Thank you very much, councillors, for your decision, and thank you very much once again to our officers for the work that led to this point. We come now to item number 11.
Excuse me, can I just ask a question? How can you pass an emergency budget if you don't have the rate setting that goes with it?
The short answer to that is that you can't, and it would be an impossibility at this point not to pass the budget because we are legally bound and reputationally bound to passing the budget. Thank you for that question, even though it was out of order. Kaipara, item, but a very good question nonetheless. Item number 11, Kaipara Moana remediation, and invite John Hutton and Craig McElroy and team to the table, and Phil Wilson. Okay, the question is, have we got the latest paper and recommendations up on Nexus? We have it on the screen, and there are some small amendments that I'll ask John Hutton to go through. The answer is yes, apparently, Councillor Cooper, they were loaded this morning. Just to get the recommendation on the books, can I ask for somebody to move that? Councillor Cooper, seconder. Councillor Mulholland. And John, I'll ask you to lead off. This, just by way of a very brief introduction, is the biggest ever remediation effort that has been made in the Kaipara. So this paper in front of us today is really important. John.
Thank you, Your Worship. The paper's looking for two main outcomes. The first, to agree to sign a memorandum of understanding with the Northland Regional Council, 5 iwi entities known as the Kaipara entities, and the Crown. And the second is to agree to form a joint committee with those parties, except for the Crown, to provide governance and stewardship to the program. I won't talk about the wider context here, except to mention that this has been a long time coming. The paper tells the story of the last few years, but sitting behind that is about 3 decades, I would say, where two things, relationships and trust and understanding, sorry, 3 things, relationships, trust and understanding have been built. The relationships and trust are about the councils and how they interact with each other, and also the iwi around the table and the communities. That trust has been helped in the last few years by the treaty settlement conversations that have been going on. The understanding question is a long story of science and a long story of community and iwi engagement around trying to figure out what has been going wrong with the Kaipara Harbour. The story is very simple. It gets too much eroded soil or sediment into it. The breakthrough was a couple of years ago when a very important paper was developed by Auckland Council and Northland Regional Council, and I need to shout out to the Natural Environment Strategy team here at Auckland Council. This report identified not just the problem, but how to address it and the kind of cost that was involved. And the cost was the thing that has been so confronting. So what we have here is the Crown coming with an unprecedented level of support for this remediation program that's been developed. I should note that the Northland Regional Council has considered this yesterday and has passed very similar, or in fact the same resolutions that are before you right now, almost the same at least, and the Southern Kaipara iwi ngā maunga whakahi have done the same. Turi o Hau are considering it today, and the other iwi are having meetings within the next few days within the week. I should also say that the Memorandum of Understanding in the terms, there are new versions of those with some minor changes which have improved the documents. They've gone through pretty extensive legal review and governance review, and they're also, particularly the MOU, that is supported by the Crown. So we've hopefully covered off all of the corners there. The specific points I'd just like to bring your attention to, 2 matters. In terms of the Chair's recommendations and the minor changes up here to the resolutions, a couple of them are there to do with creating a bit more belts and braces around the long-term plan, sorry, not long-term plan, the Local Government Act procedures that we need to follow, and the other key changes, just to make sure that we've got a simple name for this, the Kaipara Moana Remediation Joint Committee, so we all know what the Joint Committee is. One other matter, in the main report in the financial implications section, paragraph 81, there's the statement that a share of contributions between Auckland Council and the Northland Regional Council is proposed to be split evenly. The Memorandum of Understanding actually commits to that. Apologies, it's an oversight in the phrasing in the main report. Our recommendation is that that's a sensible approach to take, both because of the relationship with the Northland Regional Council, the mutual benefit that we get for the harbour from everybody chipping in, and also because we have responsibility as a territorial authority for about half the harbour, so our recommendation is that that's followed.
Finally, I'd like to just offer some acknowledgements to all of the staff who've worked on this in many ways, and that's not just across councils, but it's also the Kaiparauri organisations and the Ministry for the Environment. And I'd like to acknowledge the political support that's been had, again across Auckland Council and the Rodney Local Board, and including across the Northland Regional Council, the Kaipara District Council and the Whangarei District Council, and a particular acknowledgement to the Auckland elected members who have been in the background and in fact the foreground leading matters with the Kaipara Moana Working Party and the Treaty Settlement, the Treaty of Waitangi Settlements Working Party within Auckland Council. Kia ora koutou.
Thank you very much, John. Just before I open it for questions, recommendation H says that we'll be appointing 3 Auckland Council members to the Kaipara Moana Remediation Joint Committee. It is suggested that 2 of those be members of this governing body and 1 of the Rodney Local Board. The Rodney Local Board has forwarded the recommendation of Phelan Puri, so I'd like to place that nomination as one of the 3. The other 2, I've had some preliminary discussions. Councillor Greg Sayers is the local member, I presume will want to be involved in this, and Councillor Daniel Newman is with a spokesmanship on the 3 harbours. I understand that you'd also like to be on that joint committee. So with the approval of the mover and seconder, Linda Cooper and Tracy Mulholland, unless there's any dissent from those 3 names, I'll propose that those names be embedded in the recommendations. So, Linda, Tracy, you're happy with those nominations?
Mr. Chair, that's okay.
Yeah, sorry, I should have raised that.
Sorry, so was I,
before.
because I would have liked to have also supported, but I'll accept those.
Okay.
So I do want to make a comment.
Yep, no, that's fine. I think I'll take questions first and then comments, because there's a lot of specifics in this. The important thing to note, having just approved the budget, is that we have already budgeted under the long-term plan for 15 million for the Kaipara, and this will involve a contribution of 10 million, and it will be the responsibility of those nominated to the committee obviously to bring anything back if there were to be any suggested increase in expenditure bias. This is, we don't have a lot of room to move in this area, but I'm assured that the 15 million that we have voted in the long-term plan will carry us through the first 6 years of this 10-year program. The other 4 years will need to come back to the governing body for. So, questions first of all, Councillor Walker.
Just a couple of questions. We've got a climate impact statement, and it mentions the 9 million trees, and they're going to be native trees, and that's wonderfully encouraging. I'm assuming they're going to be native trees. My question is, can we start quantifying this kind of thing? Because this level of investment is incredibly encouraging as it goes to mitigating emissions. If we can quantify things progressively, then we can feed it in. So I'll just put that question up or suggestion up to start with. You want to
thank you.
feedback on that?
Initial response, the 9 million would be a mixture of native and exotic. There's a very useful strategic use of poplars, fast-growing poplars for hillside stabilisation, and there would be some targeted afforestation and pine in particular areas with a balance of commercial opportunities for the landowners. So it's not just natives in that sense. Until we get native cultivars or native species that can do the job that a poplar can, we're committed to the poplar. There is work, however, on what you'd call companion planting, where you start with a poplar and you have a tortora going up beside it. It's just the tortora takes a lot longer to grow. Sorry, and as for your question, yes, it would be great to start to be able to quantify that. We haven't, the actual carbon sequestration benefits and things of this, we haven't done that work, but I think it's a very useful suggestion to build that into our analysis of the success or not of the program.
I'm happy to commit to that piece of work, Wayne. I think we want this to be an exemplar program, and it has to be best practice to include climate issues as part of the success of the program. So happy to commit to that.
By way of response, very encouraged. Don't have an issue around the poplars, understand that. Do have an ongoing concern around pine trees, and I would hope that we start taking a mature response to that. And I would just mention as an aside, water care is obviously phased out pine and exclusively native in the catchment for our dams, and there's good substantiation around that. The other question I've got is the other issue that goes to this catchment generally, which is around, I think, the largest landfill in New Zealand or close to it, in the catchment of the Kaipara. Does this program and the program of work offer any opportunity to pick up some of the environmental impacts that could flow from that? And I note that the parties to this in respect of iwi are raising some significant concerns around that landfill, which is in the Dome Valley.
The short answer is no. The program's trying to deal at a landscape scale on rural properties, in particular in pasture. The TIP proposal is subject right now to our RMA processes of assessing it, and there's a resource consent in, but no, there's been no budget here designed for mitigations to that.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Christavi.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, just on the joint committee, this is a seriously important body, and it will be around for some time. So I'm just thinking of that makeup of our representation. I'm mindful of it reporting into the Environment and Climate Change Committee, and it's usual that the chair's there. And I'm just wondering, I'm not wanting to displace any of the members under Romans 1, 2, 3, but I'm just wondering if there's a possibility of having an ex officio role of, initially I was thinking you, Mayor, or the chair of the Environment and Climate Change Committee, because it is important that you have that link. You need a strong link back to your chair of the reporting committee. I'm just wondering if that has been given some thought. So, is there a way that either the chair or the mayor could be given an ex officio role?
I think it would be helpful, obviously, if the nominated members of the governing body on the joint committee would report both to me and to the chair. I don't know that we need to minute that, but just to keep us up with what's happening, because this is an area of pretty high importance, obviously, to the council as a whole. And, you know, from time to time, John, it would be good to get an update, given that we're investing in this area, to get an update from officials on the progress that is being made and next steps. So I think both of those things, Councillor, would be really desirable. I'm not sure that we need to minute them in here or make them part of a resolution, but you're quite right, that would be quite important.
Kia ora. We can definitely commit to reporting back. That's the intention. The difficulty with any additional seats or roles is that there's a balance to be struck on this committee with 6 Kaipara Uri, 3 Northland Regional Council, 3 us. As soon as we start adding people, it's an exponential kind of increase.
Just one more.
But I should note, just as assurance, under the Local Government Act, of course, any elected member of a council may attend and participate in discussions within a committee such as this. So there's no impediment to involvement of elected members if they wish to appear. There just wouldn't be a voting ability.
Well, sorry, if I may, Chair. What about an alternate situation then, if one doesn't attend? So you're covered, an alternate of either the chair or the mayor.
We have thought that through, and our preference is not to go there in so much as previous discussions on the treaty settlement front around the future Kaipara body, which is the statutory body that, when that comes into existence, this committee would dissolve. The discussions around the table on the question of alternates was quite strongly against that idea, in that if you're a member of the committee, the expectation is you're there. The relationships around the committee are very important, and Kaipara themselves were saying that they weren't keen to have a kind of people coming in and off, and so we're trying to keep that continuity with our anticipated future state with the statutory body.
Thank you. I mean, it may be that we could add, and I'll just ask for a quick amendment to be made that would require a 6-monthly report back. I think that would be appropriate to the probably to the Environment and Climate Change Committee. Can I also suggest, I've had the opportunity to do it, is a chance to give for councillors to go up to the Kaipara Harbour. It's, sometimes we talk about the Monaco being the forgotten harbour, but Kaipara is the really forgotten harbour. And as you go out and down the Hotio River and you see the sheer amount of siltation and the damage that's been done to that harbour, you understand why this work is so important. So it may be, John, that you could organise a field trip at some point, that councillors would be invited to have a look at the sort of work. There's also, I've been up there, I'm trying to think who was I with you, Councillor Cooper? We went up to a trust that is planting native trees up there and has done a fantastic job. And I think it was you and Penny Hulse. Yeah. Yeah. So it would be good just to give people around this table a better understanding of what's happening in our northern regions, because it is important. So I'll come back. I'll see if there's further questions. I've got one from Councillor Mulholland. I'll come back with a suggested amendment for maybe a 6-monthly report. Councillor Mulholland.
Sorry, actually my question was, because I fully support this, and actually I do spend a bit of time at the Kaipara in my spare time, and with my new apiculture course coming up, I'm hoping to spend a bit more time there, so very supportive. So I was actually going to ask the question as an alternative, because it is one of the things amongst the many, but one of the particular things, because I do spend time there, that I was interested in. So Chris, Councillor Darby, sorry, did ask my question, Your Worship, with regards to an alternative. Kia ora. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we've got recommendation P up there, but yeah, really also want to follow through with the chance for councillors that would be interested. Councillor Newman, I think maybe you might want to coordinate that as spokesperson on the on our 3 harbours, to get a trip up there and have a look at the work that's being done on land and the damage that's being done on the harbour. Right. I have no further question. Councillor Hills.
Just the P, agree that the group, I'm not sure, should it be
committee?
That, yeah, it just, I imagine putting it on the members to write
actually,
a report.
you could give it its full title if you like, which is Kaipara Moana Joint Remediation Joint Committee, I think, from memory. Just double check that.
Mr. Chairman, I'm just a bit uncomfortable. There's no relationships here. The people here are suggesting these have not got these relationships, and I just worry that we're asking the whole steering group to come down, report. We've had a channel where we've reported this back through the Treaty Settlements steering group over the last few years, but not many people have been interested. But I just don't know whether, we have the power to sort of instruct that group, and that's my concern. It's more likely that it's not the group that's going to.
No, it's the governing. Sorry, that's a very good point. And it's not my intention that the group comes.
Just say the council representatives.
Yeah, that the governing body representatives agree that the governing body representatives. Actually, council representatives. You're quite right. On the Kaipara Moana Remediation Joint Committee report too. Sorry, thank you. That's a good point.
Sorry, Mayor. Are there staff members who will be supporting those elected, because it's unfair to, well, it's not unfair, but if it's an actual report, then it's not the governing body members or the local board member who would be reporting back. It'll be a staff report, and the governing body members may want to speak to that, but I think it's unfair to ask the council representatives to prepare a report. That's not the normal.
It doesn't have to be a staff report, though. I have no doubt that John Hutton will be the person that will be drafting it after consultation with the governing body members. John, would you like to comment on that?
Your Worship, that's a strong assumption on your part. I'm yet to clear that with my boss. Look, we have absolutely no issue in providing support. In fact, the terms of reference for the committee are quite explicit that support's anticipated, so that can happen. This joint committee is going to require quite a collaborative approach between all of the parties involved. The Kaipara entities themselves have staff members that can form part of the work that sits behind the scenes, so to speak. So in our anticipation, in fact, the resolution up in there is that the reporting back is to the Environment and Climate Change Committee. So none of that's an issue. Kia ora.
So should it just say an update rather than the council rep,
I think the report is we're probably talking about the same thing. I think we've got the wording right now. So thank you for the interventions from councillors Cooper and Hills on that, because that's exactly what's intended. Okay, are there any further questions? If not, are there any comments that anyone around the table would like to make? Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and we've got 3 excellent people joining this committee. That's great news. The silent party hasn't been heard from today. Here are the property owners up there, and especially the hill country people. And I initially said I'd help join this panel as being a person who's in the hill country and knows a bit about it. But I'm more than happy to stand aside with Daniel with his hat on as the harbour's lead, as portfolio holder for that, and that's important. I think it's important to say here in public that the property owners are a significant part of this, and they've already started the program of fencing, planting and doing what can be done on challenging country. And they've already spent, in many cases, collectively tens of millions of dollars, but there's more always to be done. Sometimes the money's the easiest part in this work. The hardest part's humping those trees up the hills, digging those poplar poles, they sound easy, cleaning up the mess when they fall over, repairing storm damage on hill country and so forth. So it's not that simple. I've seen what 5 kilometres of fence either side of a waterway and over 100,000 native tree plants being torn out down to the bedrock and deposited on flats. I've seen the damage from that sort of storm event of just a few years ago. And Mr. Mayor, you actually saw it as you drove past as well. So it's not as easy as people think or sound. And it's been happening for centuries when it was a forest in its natural state, and it's been increased with clearing of that land. So all power to this group. It's going to be challenging work. It's not going to happen overnight, but we will see improvements in the water quality in both the waterways, fresh waterways, and in the seaways. So I'll be watching from afar, keep my ear to the ground, as you know I do, John, and good luck and good fortune to all of those involved, I say. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and I think it is important just to emphasise to people that there'll be 100 million coming from the government, 20 million from the Northland Regional Council and Auckland Council, but another 80 million from the landowners, which is also pertinent to Councillor Walker's questions about pines, because if farm owners are putting a lot of money into this, some of them will be seeking an alternative to pastoral farming on territory, on countryside that's not suitable for it, and pines will be part of that process. That's not something that we can dictate on, because we are looking for the voluntary contribution by landowners, both in their time and work and money, to making sure that this can work. Councillor Cooper.
Just making sure there's no one else, because I'll close the debate.
Yeah, no, there is somebody else, so I'll hold your call, Councillor, if I may. Councillor Newman.
Well, thank you, Your Worship, for the opportunity to make these comments. I'm reflecting on the discussion that's been had so far. I want to acknowledge Councillor Darby for nourishing us with his wise words of caution, but I can assure him that I think Councillor Sayers and Councillor and myself are both members of the Committee of the Whole, and I'm sure that speaking for Councillor Sayers, although I haven't asked for his permission to do so, we won't be operating in silos here, but I welcome Councillor Darby giving me his insights and reflections moving forward. Your Worship, I think there are two issues here for this particular program. The first is a need to understand the challenge that not all parties to the program are equal, and Councillor Cashmore is correct that the party here that probably gets the least exposure are the property owners in the hill countries. Some of the areas within the catchment, within the watersheds of the Kaipara Harbour are quite degraded, marginal areas in terms of farming. There is a lot of sediment runoff. There is a significant cost to this program, and it is a cost that will be spread over time. The second issue is a budgetary issue for the councils that are party to this, because this is a program that will need to be sustained over an extended period, and understanding that there is a big difference between Auckland Council and Northland Regional Council, and we will need to be an equal partner, but we will need to ensure that the other party to this discussion from a council perspective is able to sustain its contribution. And that will be something that will need to be reflected upon, and it will need to be reported back as we discuss not only the implementation of the program, but the way in which this program will be funded beyond the life of the long-term plan. Your Worship, I want to acknowledge the government for its contribution here. This has been a long process of negotiation leading to the proposal, and that is serious funding from the Crown as a contribution here, and that is something that needs to be acknowledged. And I actually think that this particular program of works will represent one of the most significant steps towards our contribution towards abating the detrimental effects of climate change this term. I think, if anything, this is it, and I want to acknowledge the work that Craig McElroy and his team at Healthy Waters will lead, because they will be instrumental. The one other comment that I would make, Your Worship, is that hard on the heels of this is a need to address the Monaco Harbour as well. That is a degraded harbour environment, and it needs the support of this council, not only in terms of the harbour but also the tributaries to it. So I want to commend the recommendations for this particular program for the Kaipara Harbour, but also state that we do need to address the other pressing environmental issues in the other two harbours in Tamaki Makaurau. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's absolutely correct. Councillor Hills.
Thank you, Mayor Goff. No, just a quick couple of words. This is extremely exciting. This is massive. This will be transformational for our whole city, not just the Kaipara itself. But I think it's a model. Obviously, we haven't seen the results of it, but we assume that the results of mana whenua, working with councils, working with council staff, working with the local board, working with other councils around the far north, and Kaipara, means that this, should be a model for the Monaco. It should be a model for other things that we have to do, because we cannot do this ourselves, or we cannot expect often private landowners to be able to afford to do this sort of work that actually benefits all of us. So to work with those private landowners, and it may not be easy. There will be some that will be excited and forthcoming, and there'll be others that might find it difficult to jump in. But I think this is, pretty fantastic from the government, but also the long-term planning that has been done by members of this governing body, the local board, but also the Healthy Waters and other staff who've been working on this a long time. So I think there is, we need to look at how we can get this for the Monaco Harbour, a similar type of work, because with everyone working together, we know that dollar goes, 10 times further than if we do it alone. So I just think it's exciting. Thank everyone with the passion behind it, Linda Cooper and others who've been talking about this for a long time as well. But I just think this could be a serious model long term for our future as a city, to really get the environmental, the water quality, the climate change impacts and the adaptation that we need over time to help protect our coastline, protect our native fish and other animals because of, you know, whether it's farming or built infrastructure or housing that helps ruin our rivers and harbours. This will help take it back the other way. So congratulations to everyone for this, and I'm just so glad it's really happening. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Worship. Councillor Hill's stole a bit of my thunder there, but you're absolutely right. It's very, very positive news, very exciting, and can develop a model that can be wound out to our other harbours. I think it'd be remiss not to give acknowledgement to Councillor Cooper, Worship, with the work that she's been done. She's been working with this, with me. I came on board last term on it. She'd been on it much longer than I had, and because of that hard work that's been done there, you know, we're in this position now. So I would like to acknowledge the councillor for her fine work. There's also, and just picking up on Bill's point too, it's going to be a bit sad not to have you there, Bill, because you can talk the lingo there. But I'm pleased that you're yeah. I'm pleased that you're willing to stay close to it. And I'd like to just mention the relationships also can extend into other groups, federated farmers, into lamb and beef, into Fonterra, and they can help us get the message across to those landowners as well. And we look forward to taking on that challenge as well. So, yeah, thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you very much. And in reply, Councillor Cooper.
Kia ora, Atua. There's a few things I want to say, and a lot of them are around thanks, and I think that this has sort of gone under the radar until now. And I want to acknowledge Councillor Penny Webster, who was part of this. I was on my first term with her, so 7 years that I've been involved, but this has been going on much longer. And I need to acknowledge the kaupara uri and the chair that's been leading that is Tame Tarangi. And the relationships that we've built up over the years, and particularly the trust in our staff, with the Northland Regional Council, Kaipara District, even Whangarei, but we've got it down to the 2 regional councils now. And I think we should be very proud of our staff, our engineers, our water people, our legal people. John in particular will not sing his own praises, of course. He has really held this together. And it's his negotiating skills and savvy that has got us to where we are now. And I want to acknowledge that. We would not have this significant contribution from the government without that combined effort of our fantastic staff, as well as Northern other council staff as well, and the relationships we've built, the trust that we've built with the kaupara uri. That has been critical, and that's got to remain critical. Because if we don't keep those relationships strong, and you're going to have to build those relationships, build that trust, we won't have anything. And if we look at our other, this will be eventually a co-governance entity. If we can have it successful like our others, it's going to go far, and it's going to be a testament to a lot of the work that's been put out over the years. People like Dame Nida Glavish as well that's involved, but also many elders who've actually passed away through this process over the years. And so I want to acknowledge those people that have gone before, that have put their heart and soul in for their people, because that's really important, and they won't be forgotten. I want to acknowledge the farmers as well, because they always get a bad rap. You know, they get a really bad rap, but we've seen some amazing examples in the kaupara where farmers are just going it alone and doing the best they can with what they've got to help remediate the harbour, but they can't do it by themselves. So with this contribution, and I hope that a lot of their contribution is counted in their voluntary hours and the community hours that are put into the tree planting and all the things they do and what they forego in making money off their land. So I think that's really important too, that it's a partnership between the councils, the government, the uri and the landowners. We have in our territory half of the harbour, but not all the catchments, fewer of the catchments. But without us joining in, we're never going to get there. So I feel it's a really good, it's a good day that we're doing this. And I just, you know, I've really loved being part of it. I'm going to miss it. But I think that Councillor Newman and Councillor Sayers will carry on and build what we've got from here and create a really fantastic, another fantastic co-governance model. So I commend it to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Linda. Can I add my voice of thanks to yourself and Deputy Mayor Cashmore for your input into this area. And, you know, these meetings will be open if either of you wish to attend and be active in it. But I know you've got other responsibilities as well. But you've laid a lot of the groundwork, both of you. I want to acknowledge the government again. We're getting this money out of the Jobs for Nature package. It's $1.1 billion there. So we should keep looking for further opportunities to take advantage of that investment. To John and Craig, thank you both for your involvement. And this is really going to be a legacy project. It will make a big difference. You know, that farmland should probably never have been broken in, like most farmland in the hill country areas around the country. Incredible damage has been done. It's never too late to start to remediate it. And this gives us a real opportunity to do just that. And to acknowledge those people that have been farming up there. They're not wealthy farmers by any stretch of the imagination. One or two up there that have got big land holdings, but the average farmer up there is not overbrimming with funding. So we do need to acknowledge their role, as we need to acknowledge the role of Kaipara Uri in that. So that's great. I anticipate we'll won't have opposition to the recommendations in front of us. So I'll put the recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. Declare it passed unanimously. Now, there's a small chance that we could get through our agenda by lunchtime. So shall we just push ahead and try and do that? The next... Yeah, exactly. Elected members' expense policy. So we have Warwick and Rose. Just Warwick and Phil. Okay. So councillors will note that we are not seeking to adopt the childcare package this year, and that's because of obvious financial reasons, but that will be revisited next year. And I think the only other significant change is to have the travel of the mayor and the deputy referred to, validated by, I think is the word I'm being told to use, the chair of the audit committee, who is an independent person, or one of her other independent reps. But I'm happy to move this, or move seconded, and I'm not putting it yet. So Warwick, is there anything you want to add to it? And then I've got some people. We'll put questions and comments together as well, I think.
Just to point out the timing around this, you'll notice that a lot of the local board feedback was in support of what we included in the report at the time, which was to support childcare allowances and so on. So I need to just point out the timing on that. That was pre-COVID times, and so things have changed since then. And I think that's the main comment I'd make, Your Worship.
Thank you very much. So we begin at the top of the question comment list with Shane Henderson, who was one of those that will be affected by our decision should we take it to defer. But Shane.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, look, I want to briefly acknowledge staff. I want to acknowledge Member Poppelbaum from the Hibiscus and Bays Local Board, with whom I worked well on this proposal here before COVID-19 hit. And just briefly acknowledge LGNZ's Young Elected Members Group that pushed for this proposal as well. this was proposed to be cut, and I support that actually. Needing to find something like $750 million, meaning something that didn't exist yesterday, would need a hell of a case for investment today, and I understand that. I know it's not necessarily a popular view for every elected member, because we have discussed this over some across the country and across Auckland as well. And I want to acknowledge all the parents and young people involved in governance across the city and their views on this. I support C, but as someone with a young family, as the Mayor has pointed out, I know firsthand the difficulties in doing this 24/7 publicly demanding job while also juggling the demands of family life. So I support C with that proviso that has now been included, that we revisit this idea for a debate and discuss this together prior to the next local elections, so that we can, in my view, go out to the communities and encourage young people to stand for this table and for local boards, safe in the knowledge that help will be there to actually manage the job. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Henderson. And next is Councillor Casey.
This is where I'm missing Councillor Penny Hulse, because she would be nodding across the room because she would know what I'm about to say, because I've raised it every single time the elected member's expense policy has come before us, and that's payment for alcohol using ratepayers' money in any shape or form. And she'd be nodding now to amend or to second an amendment. So I don't know if I've even got a seconder, but I've got one. That's great. We've taken alcohol out of this expenses policy, but it still pops up in two places. The first is third-party expenses when we have visitors, and that's I'll point to the relevant clauses if I can find my glasses. And that's on our page 198. The council will not pay for any alcohol except for the approved entertainment of third parties. See paragraph 11.9. It's actually 12.9. And if you go to 12.9, you'll see that serving alcohol may be permissible at some council events. I have a constituent in Mount Roscoe that I think of instantly every time this comes before us, because he is adamant that his rates should not be used in any shape or form to pay for alcohol. So that's the first time it's mentioned. So we've got events and we've got third party. And I just put it to you that one of our aims in the Auckland plan is to reduce harm from alcohol. At the same time, we are allowing it to be. I think if you want alcohol, you pay for it yourself, basically. And the Mayor will now give his speech about foreign entities coming into this country to be hosted by the council that expect alcohol. Actually, the Mayor's budget could pay for that. All right, so that's it. I would like to see the alcohol provisions removed from this, so that we are an alcohol-free council with regard to ratepayers' money.
Yeah.
Hey.
Thank you. I feel obliged to take the next call in response to that. Warwick or Phil, have we spent a cent on alcohol? I'm just trying to think of an event that I've been at that's a council event, either hosted by myself or anybody else, where we've had alcohol.
Swearing in.
With swearing in was probably one exception to that, was it?
I don't think I could be really specific. What I could say is that there is absolutely minimal occasions where there is council supplied alcohol. It's a fairly rare event, Your Worship.
And I just want to add to that on occasions when I have groups up into my office, and sometimes do for an evening event, the cost of any alcohol served there is met not by the Mayor's office, but by non-council funds. So I accept what you say, Councillor Casey, and I'm probably the stingiest Mayor that the city will ever have in terms of expenditure, and I don't intend to spend money on alcohol, but there may be the odd occasion where you have to host some event where somebody is visiting, where there is wine served with a meal, and that is then covered by all of the other things there that says that it must be modestly priced, etc. I am very well aware of the front page of the Herald Test, and there is no way
that I'm going to see ratepayer money abused. But there will be, I just want to say that there can be, although I can't think of the last occasion when it happened, a situation where somebody is visiting and whether it's the mayor's office that pays for it or anywhere else, that's still council money. So, you know, we probably would do it out of the mayor's office. It would be used really and very modestly, and, you know, I'm not particularly fussed about the whole issue, and I don't want to make an issue of it, but I just want to give those assurances. Right, we have Councillor Coombe.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have a partai. At paragraph 27, it says about staff are seeking from the Remuneration Authority their advice on the issue raised by local boards regarding active modes of transport and whether this all comes down to the definition of a vehicle. I just wondered where that discussion had ended up.
There has been some brief discussion with the Remuneration Authority's office, and my understanding of that discussion is that there wasn't a clear indication one way or the other, but an invitation to us to make a submission. But basically our approach in this today is to not recommend anything additional to what we already have.
Thank you. I don't think it goes to any particular change in the policy. Other than it's good to see that there's more encouragement for using public transport. I think the the expenses policy has often been very bogged down about parking. We pay more attention to our car storage than we do for looking after children or other expenses that members might have. So I think it's going in the right direction, but there's potentially some more thought that needs to go into how we are encouraging all elected members to consider how they travel and the incentives that we put in place. So that was a little added comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Just to remind councillors that did want to finish by lunchtime, we'll need to keep rattling through. Councillor Darby.
Thanks. Councillor Coombe has asked my first question, so I think that should be picked up at some stage. I note under the climate change statement and further into the policy, it's under 6.3, elected members are expected to use public transport in the first instance. And I then go through to 9.3, car parking is related to airport parking. Can we add the words or public transport there? I've raised it with Mr McNaughton earlier. Because, look, we're investing in Puanui. We've already got a bus service, multiple bus services to the airport, but we're investing in Puanui. I would hope that we are all signing up for that as our preferred way to go to the airport rather than be taking the car parking. So, quick question, can there just be a minor amendment to add the words or public transport there?
Yes, my suggestion there would be words that express council's preference for public transport. At the moment, that table is a list of items that you can claim expenses for, and it says for airport car parking, if it's more economical for the elected member to leave his or her car at the airport rather than take a taxi, etc., if you add public transport at that point, public transport is always going to be more economical than car parking at the airport. You're forcing the member to always take a bus, which might not be appropriate at some times. So I think if we just add a sentence which expresses the council's preference, which is the word that you used as well, I think, that for public transport, that would cover it.
Okay, look, that's fine with me. I'll just leave it there. But I do home in on that particular clause 6.3. Elected members are expected to use public transport in the first instance. I would actually like to know. I know a lot of people around this table really make a big effort, but I think we need to make an even bigger effort as well. And we're going to have to start living what's in our climate action plan. You know, we've signed up to it, and here's a case. If I can just say, if you look at the subsidy of the car parking in the basement of 135, it runs into tens of thousands of dollars. Our car parking in the basement of 135, if you price it at $25 a day, that's a pre-COVID price, it's probably half that at the moment. Multiply that out, it's a multi-$1,000 subsidy to each and every one of us. That eventually ratepayers pick up, because we could actually sell that car park into the private sector for demand. But I think we need to really home in on this one. The next time we look at this expense policy, I'm probably like Councillor Coombe. I'd really like to home in on some of the things that our boards have raised, and really push this public transport priority absolutely first, not just in words, that we actually go and live it.
Thank you very much. Some of us, unfortunately, aren't blessed with having public transport services, Deputy Mayor, that come anywhere near where we live, like tens of kilometres away. Councillor Cooper.
I was just going to ask, where do I sign up for my ergometric assessment?
Councillor Collins wants to answer that question.
I was just going to say, I've had one of those ergonomic, or whatever they call them, and that's why I've got a desk that goes up and down. Sorry.
So, Councillor Cooper, talk to Councillor Collins. I'm coming to you shortly,
really?
Councillor Collins. Councillor Hills.
Thank you. I understand the COVID-19 impacts, but what the council did support the childcare allowance pre-election, and I kind of assumed it was already in there. I guess for me, it's just what indication did we give to those? You know, I feel for and looking at the numbers, it's 10%. 10% of our total elected members have children under 14. So for me, it's like that's potentially an issue that only 10% of the elected members that are here for representing all of Auckland have kids. So clearly, and you can't join the dots clearly, but there, from all the anecdotal evidence from young elected members, was that it is more likely that younger people, or people who are parents, or people who cannot afford childcare, or the constraints that come with having kids, they're less likely to stand for office. So I guess we just have to be really careful here that we're not further ingraining a position where people with kids feel find it a lot more difficult to stand. I mean, I don't have kids, but I think that for a city like ours, and with a growing young population, more and more kids are becoming the majority, that we don't have probably the equal number of parents on our elected member pool that actually fit the population. So it's not representative of all of the actual population. It's not even close. So I just wonder, if we keep ingraining that those limitations, then we're never going to get the mix of people on our boards.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Collins.
Oh, thanks, Mayor. I just wanted to, I agree with the take that Councillor Henderson has on point 3 for childcare. And I just wanted to clarify, though. Councillor Henderson said we'll relook this before the next election, and the writing says 2021. Is that what you mean by before the next election? Because that's a year before the next election. That timing is correct?
It's not a hard and fast date. We're just saying now is not the right time, perhaps in a year's time.
Okay, in a year. So cool, that's fine. And I just wanted to make the comment that I think it's similar to Councillor Hills. We've got to make consideration for parents. I had the ability yesterday, and thank you to Sandra, where we had a family emergency late at night, so I had to stay home with baby, and so I came into the meetings by phone. And so I guess that the ability to have that level of flexibility is what we're looking for. So it might not be childcare costs, but Skype could be part of the answer. Skyping in could also be part of our public transport answer as well. So I think a wider look at this is needed. I wanted to note that I wasn't sure that EAP was in the policy before, but I note that it is under 4.4, and I think it's really good. I pay my own supervision costs because I used to be a youth worker, and supervision, which is kind of like EAP but different to EAP, is something that I pick up on my own, and I think it's really good. If councillors feel, or elected members feel they need it, then by all means take it up, because I think it's a really useful service. And just finally, I wanted to confirm with Councillor or Dr. Casey if she was just floating the idea of an amendment, because I was happy to second an amendment, because I hear the comment around using it very rarely, the ability to pay for alcohol, but like my supervision costs, I just think if you're hosting someone and you need a glass of wine as part of your meal, you pick it up on their behalf and everything else can be covered by council. But I'm not sure if you've moved that amendment, which I'm happy to second, Dr. Casey. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the issue is not where you're hosting a single person, but if there's a delegation coming from somewhere. Look, it is rare and unusual, and I'm sympathetic with the viewpoints of both councillors. Councillor Mulholland.
Thank you, Worship. Your Worship, just with regards to a point of order or clarity, please, if you wouldn't mind. When Councillor Casey raised the issue, Councillor Henderson waved his hand and said, I second that. And now Councillor Collins has just made his statement with regards to that. So my understanding, and can I please be corrected, because I need to know what is the appropriate way in which we are working under standing orders. If it is seconded, then could you just clarify, because Councillor Henderson, you did wave out quite clearly that you second that, and I heard you say that from here. Could you please, that's just one point, could you please just clarify for me, because I want that clear about what standing orders.
No, fair point. For an amendment to be moved, it needs to be moved formally and seconded, and usually it's in writing to me, or to Sandra. So I think Councillor Henderson was showing his approval for the principle rather than claiming to formally second.
Okay, well then we need to be really clear when we do that, just how that reads. And whilst I understand we can amend, it just seems a little ad hoc in my perspective. So I'd like to say that just having witnessed ATEED host people at an event when I walked in to talk about some training, there were a whole group of people in their boardroom drinking, and I said, oh, what's happening there? And it was actually an event. So we need to also be mindful what our CCOs do and how that looks to people like myself and others. And whilst I'm happy to pay for my own alcohol, and well and truly do, I do agree with the principle that we have to host guests, but we shouldn't be providing on an ad hoc basis any alcohol. So kia ora, thank you.
Thank you. Just to clarify, any of the CCOs, this policy relates to the parent body, not the CCOs, if that's correct. Okay, thank you. Councillor Bartley.
Oh, thank you. I was just picking up on the comments being made around how we behave and how to change our own behaviour. And I think it's kind of sad that it has to come through the expense policy. So where do we have that space or that opportunity to talk about those things rather than try and get us to act a certain way through expense policy? Is there another way, or is it through this? Because I'm still going to take my car to the airport because I want to catch my flight. But yeah, you know, there's other things coming through. So where do we have that discussion?
Well, I think if there are some related issues that councillors wish to discuss, then I think a workshop would be the appropriate vehicle. I think, as Warwick said, you need to be very careful with something formal like an expenses policy, which is endorsed ultimately by the Remuneration Authority. That's why Warwick has suggested wording like preference for, rather than something that's very restrictive and not pragmatic in terms of airport travel, for example. So I would caution people to do anything too ad hoc here in terms of the wording of what's quite a formal piece of policy endorsed out of Wellington by the Remuneration Authority. And we can workshop broader questions with you. Just finally, this is about elected member expenses policy. It's not a body of policy more broadly for conduct in the organisation.
Warwick?
I thought I should just point out to members, under section 2 in the policy itself, the section is titled Overarching Principles. So these principles apply widely. We're looking at specific rules and instances and so on, but anything that might not be covered in the policy will be covered by these principles, and they're based on what the Auditor General calls sensitive expenditure, which is expenditure which could be seen to be of personal benefit to the member. And so the principles include things like there's got to be a justifiable council-related business purpose, it's got to be moderate and reasonable, having regard to the circumstances, be actual and justified by an original receipt, and be within budget and so on. The key thing is to ensure that the policy overall reflects a conservative approach.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Councillor Bartley?
Yeah, and I'm happy with these. I mean, I'm happy with C. It's not likely I'm going to have a child anytime soon.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Filipaina, last...
Thank you, Your Worship. Look, if the amendments are going to be put up, I'll be talking to that, and I think you've covered what needs to be covered around that amendment. So are we speaking to the amendment now, Your Worship? Because...
Thank you, Councillor. I'm just trying to sort it through because I didn't pick up that it had been moved formally, but now I'm told that it has been moved formally. And the amendment is to remove from section 9, I don't know why it's under travel expenses, it's to remove alcohol from the table. It's under attachment A. I'm just trying to figure out that still leaves stuff in at 12.9. So I'm just a little unclear as to what the impact, and maybe I'll ask Warwick to give us some advice on that. And then I'll accept the amendment, and we can go through the amendment and debate it again if you like.
Sorry, Your Worship, I'll be voting against the amendment in regards to it as a result of what you've outlined, as a result of what's been outlined over the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And also as a result of what we've been advised by Phil Wilson in regards to this, and it's around the delegation. It's not around, hey, let's open the bar on the level 2 and just get on I was going to say get on the thing, but I won't. But then look, on the terps, instead of what I wanted to, I shouldn't have, but I haven't. No, so that's why I've asked, because I will be sort of speaking against it, and so it's Warwick.
Yeah, I think we need some clarification around it. The difficulty is with when we make an ad hoc amendment, there are consequentials in other parts of the policy, and we haven't had the chance to work through this. I'm hearing what councillors are saying, and really I don't give a damn either way. Warwick, if we remove, what's the impact of removing alcohol from attachment A? And it still stays in at 12.9.
Yeah, 12.9 is it's the paragraph where it starts, serving alcohol may be permissible at some council events, and then sets some parameters around it.
So
the main concern I would have about removing it is that it's removing some guidance, like it's the staff that implement the policy or are involved in implementing it, and it just removes some guidance for staff there, which there are some specific rules. A suggestion is that where it starts, serving alcohol may be permissible at some council events. It could be more hard-lined. It could say serving alcohol at council events should be the exception.
Yeah.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Yep. Point of order, Councillor Casey.
Specifically worded it so that the events you win, that I think there should be or could be exceptions to the rule. My amendment is to the third party. When you go overseas and you provide wine, you should be paying for it for yourself. So it's section 9, not section 12.
Okay, so no, thank you for that clarification. So if, according to your amendment, section 12.9 would stay in place. The alcohol section of attachment A would be removed. So just again, I want clarification of what that would effectively mean from Warwick. just so we know what we're voting on, which is always helpful. Okay, sorry. The section, attachment A, item 12, is on page 198, and 12.9 is on page 202. So I'm just trying to, the worst thing we can do is to make amendments if we don't know what the implications are, and I'm just trying to get clarification around the implications.
Yeah, it's that one under section 9.
Your Worship, while they're doing this, can I just make, can I just...
Councillor Filipina.
Yes, sorry, Your Worship, I'm just going to make a suggestion, and it's based on the fact that this amendment is ad hoc. Could we look at coming back when we have a look at C and reviewing it? It allows Councillors Casey and Collins enough time to get an amendment that is not ad hoc, and that can be brought to the governing body. It's just a suggestion, Your Worship, because C's been up there. I just wanted to sort of put that.
Thank you, Councillor. I think that's very sensible, but I'm in the hands of the mover and the seconder. I'm not casting any aspersions on what the mover and seconder are trying to do, but I'd really like to make sure that we knew fully the implications of it. So I'm really put it back to Councillor Casey if she'd like. Can we set this up so that we can have a discussion around how this policy might be tightened, or whether we would go as far as removing any payment for alcohol in any circumstances? I just think we need to do that in a slightly more considered way. I don't have any particular vested interest in it, and I don't utilise the availability of the policy very often. But a function like the inauguration, I'd feel it'd be a little sad if we couldn't rely on councillors to have the maturity to have a glass of wine to celebrate a really important occasion. And I wasn't quite sure what removal of the page 198 provisions would do. Have you got your head around that one yet, Warwick?
So this is under the section travel expenses, is that correct? Yeah. And it's on the table. The title's alcohol, and it's just above the car parking one. Your Worship, I remember previous discussions, I think, to do with using alcohol and overseas travel and so on. And it's, from memory, originally it was fairly liberal, and each time it's discussed it's been kind of cut back. I think really it's a political decision, Your Worship.
I'm just trying to think, for example, at the Tripartite Summit, we have an occasion where we have a New Zealand night, and we do serve New Zealand wines on that occasion, and that's paid for, I guess, through ATEED. And one of the things about New Zealand Night was to promote New Zealand products, and New Zealand, we had a Maori fashion parade and the promotion of maybe it was sponsored, I don't know, but I just, before we jump in and do something, I'd just like to know all of the implications, which is why I think Councillor... Okay, somebody's waving hand. Shall I take a call from Councillor Simpson?
Thank you, Your Worship.
Who's looking to find a sensible outcome.
I am going to find a very, very sensible outcome as your Chair of Finance. And it goes like this. I do not believe ratepayer money should be spent on alcohol. We are blessed in this region with some fantastic wineries that are out west, on Waiheke, and all over the show. I think we should look at getting it sponsored, if there's anyone that would be interested in that. I don't believe that when elected members travel that the ratepayer should pick up their wine. I am a huge fan of when you have an overseas delegation. I know how these things work, as do you. And wine is often part of just like in culture, it is the food, so it is the drink. But I don't think ratepayers' money should be used. So I think we should look to seek sponsorship for this type of thing first. And if that wasn't forthcoming, have another look at it. But I do not think ratepayer money should be funded. And I think you would get, easily, a sponsor.
So I have a speaking list on this. So I'm presuming that the mover and the seconder of the amendment want to let it stay in place. No, the seconder was actually Councillor Collins. Yeah. Okay, no problem. So I'm just double checking that your preference is to leave it in place now or to do further work on it. I just need to clarify
As long as
that.
you're clear, Mr Mayor, it's about travel
Yeah.
by elected members on council business in New Zealand or overseas, spending ratepayers' money on alcohol. So it's not about your events, they're in a different
Okay.
section. So I don't think, like Leslie,
That's
it
just
should-
been confirmed. Okay, I'm relaxed about that then. Totally relaxed about it. Okay, so do we need further debate on that, or are we ready to vote? I have got a speaking list if people want to continue to speak on it. No, you've got to take your turn, Councillor Hills. It's Councillor Bartley. I've got you at the top of the list. No? That's from the previous. Councillor Filipaina is in the gallery and he's spoken already. It is Councillor Hills.
No, I guess Kathy Casey kind of confirmed what I was trying to get out. We're debating things that aren't on the table, but I think what would make it clearer and easier for everyone is if it was clear what the wording would be. And I think the wording would be, under that bit, all it should say is the council will not pay for alcohol. So it's under the travel expenses. So it's giving us an out in case we're hosting someone and we can shout them a beer or wine, but I'm pretty sure all of us could do that out of our own pocket very, very easily. That is all that is saying, and that it's not about all the other issues we're talking about. If the words were just changed to say because it's under travel expenses reimbursed, it should just say the council will not pay for any alcohol, full stop. And then that means if a councillor put in their receipt for their meal, they would just have to cross off the 2 wines and they get back the meal on their, which none of us go overseas anyway for council, hardly. But I think that's it. Am I right, Councillor Casey? That would make it.
Thank you. I think that clarifies it quite nicely. So you're happy to change it. So under alcohol, it just reads the council will not pay for any alcohol, full stop. And this relates solely to councillors or elected representatives travelling. It doesn't relate to the occasions we've talked about. That clarifies it nicely for me.
It doesn't for me.
Okay,
because
I'll come. You're next on the speaking list, Councillor Cooper.
It says here, approved entertainment of third parties. Now, you can go somewhere like, I don't know, I went on a waste management trip. That's been the sole thing I've done in 7 years to Adelaide. There was a couple of us that raced over there, like 2 nights, but we were hosted by other councils. And they're buying you drinks. Looks pretty bad when you can do it yourself, but it's not about, buying a drink for another person. It might be that you are being hosted by another council, but there's some sort of, in some places and some cultures too, a reciprocal expectation, and culturally it could be offensive. And that's, they give all their hospitality and then you just sit there and do nothing. And those are the sort of things I'm talking about. I've got no problem shouting someone a drink and paying. My expectation is always that we never apply to be reimbursed for alcohol for ourselves and somebody we've subbed. This is about the mayor maybe hosting somewhere, maybe in Taiwan, maybe somewhere, and we're doing that. I have no problem with that. We're getting a bit wowsery about alcohol. Food's, it's no different to me as food. It's a part and drink sometimes. And I think we can get too hot under the collar. What we came to last time, it says it's got to be approved first. It's got to be within the parameters of sensitive expenditure set by the Auditor General. That's pretty tight already. And I just think we're being a bit, look, the trouble with us is we come from a Victorian colonial structure where everything was bad. We might go to Europe, we might go to other places where it's quite different and people don't have that view. And I hate to see us being the meanies when we're overseas and not doing our part. And that's why I just think what we've got is perfectly all right. This has got to be approved entertainment. This is not me buying a bottle of wine and then claiming back from council for myself. That doesn't mean that. And I think we're taking it too far, so I can't support the amendment.
Thank you very much. Councillor Newman.
Thank you. Interesting. Your Worship, actually, it's probably already been addressed in response to the inquiry from Councillor Hills to the mover and seconder that there would be just the full stop inserted after the word alcohol. Because I would assume that if the entire section was to be removed, it then becomes silent, in which case you could interpret it as, well, it now becomes a permissible thing, which I think is not what the mover and the seconder of the amendment was seeking to do. Look, for me, the worst thing in the world for me is to have to go to a cocktail function and somebody hands me a glass of wine. I mean, I'm so antisocial that that's not really my thing. But so I'm. I just wonder if the mover and the seconder could reflect on the fact that the provision in the schedule, and someone who doesn't drink alcohol, but the provision in the schedule does note that the expenditure is regarded as sensitive expenditure. And I can't imagine a greater risk to anybody in elected public office than to try and to liberally interpret the permission of the sale and purchase of alcohol. I can't imagine a situation where you could get yourself into hot water than to misuse this particular provision. So I'm wondering if the mover and the seconder could reflect upon that as sufficient protection against the perception that this is going to be misused by the mayor, the deputy mayor, or whoever's hosting somebody as part of a delegation. Unfortunately, I can't support this amendment because I just think that there are times when it becomes impractical for something to take place where actually the council doesn't pay for alcohol. And so I would prefer that the amendment be withdrawn. If it isn't withdrawn, even with the amendment, I won't be supporting it.
Thank you very much. I knew I put a mocker on this discussion as soon as I said we could finish by lunchtime. I'll promise never to do that again. I think we've heard the arguments. Sorry. Councillor Koo.
Oh, if I could, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry to keep dragging this on, and I'm feeling the Deputy Mayor's pain that we spend more time talking about our expenses policy than we have on the budget. So I do feel that, and I appreciate where Councillor Casey's coming from, but I think I'm taking up on what Warwick has said. This is a very conservative policy. It gives the discretion, and it is. You don't want it to be so black and white that an elected member could be hosting or in a situation that, something that is very approved and totally above board, and you just get sprung for, a bottle of sake has been added onto, in terms of hosting and manakitanga. There's all sorts of scenarios you can see that it would be very, very regulated and controlled. And so I think we've got a really good expenses policy. And I did just want to add, in terms of why I'm not supporting this amendment, is that I got contacted by a member for Southland, and he was telling me that he can't, and Warwick helped me with this query because he was asking about our expenses policy, and he can't even claim to be able to go and visit his ward it includes Stewart Island. And so he's got huge expenses to cover and a very small remuneration. And I was thinking, I'm very fortunate in my ward I can visit, I'm the only member who has to get on a plane to go and visit my constituents, and I appreciate the policy we have and what it covers, and I think it is very sensible. It hits the right balance, and it already is taking a very conservative approach. So that's why I don't support the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I think we've exhausted the speaking list.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. I can read the writing on the wall. This has happened every time the expense policy has come up. Thank you for the debate. I will be withdrawing the amendment.
Thank you. If Councillor Collins, you need to concur with that. Thank you, Councillor. Look, okay, I think the matter is resolved. The difficulty that we haven't resolved is that there may be a perception now that we are splashing money around on alcohol I'm happy for all of our books to be opened up because I believe that the amount that we spend on alcohol under the travel expenses section would be minimal, if not for months at a time, non-existent. I will ask council officers to come back on us, but we certainly have no culture in this organisation of wasting, misusing taxpayer money on alcohol. But I just want that clarified because I wouldn't want the result of this discussion in public to be taken as councillors pass emergency budget but then allow free spending on alcohol. So we need, I'm more than happy for our books to be opened up on that for travel expenses because I think it will be very low indeed. Councillor Watson, I'm sorry, I've probably opened up the debate again.
Not a debate, just more than happy to provide a historical minute to that suggestion, Mr Mayor. I think the last time alcohol was served in here to the council, I think was December 2014 with Mayor Brown. Didn't happen again after that, and I'm pretty sure that it was complimentary wine from some Chinese delegation. So if that could be minuted, I think we've got a 6 months on the wagon at Rotorua Island in between as far as elected members go.
So look, maybe it is a case simply of asking officers so that this is in public and transparent that we report on expenditure under the said section on alcohol historically over the last 3.5 years, because I think it won't be hard to find out because it'll be pretty minimal. Yep.
As far as I know, the council buy no alcohol from either the Wiri or Waitakere Portage Licensing Trusts, so we had no conflict in supporting this policy.
And we were looking at you to be one of the sponsors. Councillor Darby. Councillor Darby.
Thanks, and I think, Mayor, you're right. It would be good to have all these expenses be transparent at one place so that they can actually be read and be attributed to individuals, and I'm happy to that. But I do say, let's identify what is that benefit of our free car parking as well. I estimate that free car parking is $125,000 per annum. Now, Kevin, you know what the value of a car park is through your property team, so that should also be identified. We don't take it as a cost, but it is actually a cost. It's 1.25 million over your 10-year budget that you could be investing elsewhere. Let's just be transparent about those benefits as well that we don't claim for because they're just assumed.
Thank you. Look, I think we're ready to put the resolutions now. Sharon, you haven't spoken.
Oh, sorry.
I'm just finding this really interesting. Something that I think, Phil, you'll probably remember Sir Barry Curtis, when we had travel meeting, if anybody was going for travel, whether it was overseas or down to Wellington or wherever they were going, it would have to be ratified by the full council or that committee, so we all know who's travelling and where they're going. And for those that really are wanting to take public transport, perhaps instead, and I just see that Julia Gent has just put a thing up, I think, that to go by train instead of to fly. So for those of you that are really wanting to save the ratepayers' money, and you don't want to fly, and you really want to save that money, go the night before, public transport, catch the train, and if you're going to an island, you could sail or you could row your boat.
Thank you. Councillor Filipina, to conclude. Order, please.
Just want to say I feel safe now going back to my chair as a result of it being withdrawn. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Look, let's just put it to a vote, but I am keen for that, the expenditure to be absolutely transparent, because I do not believe that this council wastes ratepayers' money or spends it extravagantly. So I'm going to put the recommendations A to C. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. Thank you. We have now concluded item number 12. Item number 13 is an open process report only, appointments to the demographic advisory panels. It's been moved by Councillor Casey, seconded by Councillor Mulholland. We will come to that under confidential because of the identities of the individuals should not be known until after police checks and after we have made the announcement. I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. Item number 14 is summary of governing body and committee information memoranda and briefing. It's moved by Councillor Cooper, seconded by Councillor Bartley this time. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. Item number 15 is summary of confidential decisions and related information that has been released publicly. I'll ask for Councillor Mulholland had her hand up, so she's going to move this one. Do I have a second to Councillor Sayers? All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. There is no extraordinary business, so I will move that the procedural motion to exclude the public on the basis that the information we'll discuss about the demographic advisory panel candidates is personal and shouldn't be made public until the governing body endorses a candidate and the Ministry of Justice criminal history check is completed. I have a seconder and a deputy mayor. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. We have one last item to go, councillors. I'll just give a minute for us to go into confidential and for the doors to be closed.